The deadlift is probably the first exercise and one of the most basic exercises that you learn with a kettlebell. And understand that we've already learned 90% of this because we've gone through all of the progressions to this point, and where we left off in this chain of progressions was in the body weighted hip hinge or bend pattern. So that's where we left off. Now all we're doing is adding an extrinsic load, a kettlebell. So first things first, deadlift implies dead position. The dead position for a kettlebell is going to be lined up to your heels, okay? It's not mid-foot and it's not out in front of your toes. When we're doing ballistic kettlebell exercises, we will be starting with the kettlebell out front, but that's not the dead position and that's not where we're going to be deadlifting from. Make sure the kettlebell, the center of mass, is under the center of mass of your body. Other than that, we're going to do the hip hinge that we've learned. And as we come down on this kettlebell to pick it up, we're going to hook with just our fingertips. We don't need a lot of grip on it. We don't need to try to pull that kettlebell all the way into our palms. Just a hook grip with the fingers. And then just come to standing out of that bend pattern, keeping your back straight, the same way you learned to do with body weight. Now, as you put the kettlebell down, one piece of advice I can give you is try to feel like you're putting the bell back behind you, especially as you initiate the movement. Right here, you're putting the bell down. You're almost like you're trying to put it back behind you. And look, lo and behold, it ends up right where it belongs. It doesn't end up behind you. It ends up right back here in the dead position. What happens is if you don't focus on that, generally the bell tends to kind of come down out front, where it will feel heavier, it will be less efficient. So by setting it back underneath our body, it's a more efficient way of lifting, and we're all about efficiency. So feel like you're sitting back into your hips, putting that bell back behind you, almost like you're keeping your forearm connected to your body as you hinge back and lean, and that bell will end up just a little bit further back. The next thing I want to tell you is that when you're performing a set, let's say of 10 reps, however many reps you feel like, in between those reps, don't rest the bell. Don't release the grip and re-grip the kettlebell in between reps. Instead, come to standing and then just control it down, tap the ground, and as soon as you feel it, come back up to standing. You're not even resting the entire weight of the kettlebell. You're just feeling for the ground and you're coming up, okay? So you're not re-gripping the weight, you're not letting the weight come all the way down, and you're also not losing the elastic tension in your hips and hamstrings and glutes from them lengthening out. You're not losing that elastic tension that's gonna help you drive up the next rep, okay? If you just put the bell down and reset, now there can be a purpose for that, but generally speaking, get good at doing it this way where you're chaining them together with just a tap. One final piece of advice I'm going to give you: if you are struggling with flexibility and rounding your back, so if the kettlebell sits too low to the ground, and in order for you to deadlift your kettlebell, you're rounding and you're not able to keep your back flat. Part of this can be remedied on the level of this exercise as long as we're doing the other things that we need to do to make sure that we're strengthening where we need to strengthen. In other words, strengthening the extensors of the back and the Swiss ball prone cobra and things like that. The way that I might do this, especially for somebody who has the flexibility, but they're kind of learning how to use it, which sounds silly, but it happens, is I'm gonna put the kettlebell up high and let the person just come over real close to it and start from here. Now, you're not looking for the ground, you're just moving down, and you can use a mirror and look to the side and watch, or somebody can spot you, and you're going to just do the range of motion that you have available to you, stopping at the very limit, that threshold before the rounding starts to happen, okay? And what you'll notice is if you do that incrementally, rep after rep after rep, you get deeper and deeper and deeper until all of a sudden you're touching the ground with the kettlebell with good form. So it's a good way to increase and improve your flexibility over time with rep sets and also workouts. What you could also do is start the kettlebell from high, or you could start it from a step that's an inch or two up off the ground, or you could do both. You could start the kettlebell from up high and have a step that you're feeling for as a way to stop and the stopping point. So you can combine all of those things. So if you're having any difficulty because you're rounding your back when you get down, also keep in mind that very light kettlebells sit very low to the ground and they will require a lot more flexibility. My 4 kilo kettlebell would sit so low that I'd be very, very deep in my hip hinge in order to pick that up. And then of course the heavier kettlebells, you're not so deep in that position. But that would be your cue to practice this exercise. Even if your range of motion isn't perfect yet, that's not the end of the world. What is important is that your technique is perfect within the range of motion that you have available, and we'll see that that range of motion progressively increases and improves as you practice. So let's go over some variations of the deadlift very, very briefly. One point I want to make beforehand is I don't really use a traditional bilateral, 2 legs on the ground deadlift for a strength training exercise with kettlebells, unless I happen to have 2 very heavy kettlebells that I'm utilizing. But primarily, I'm just going to grab a barbell if I'm doing that, because most people don't have kettlebells that are heavy enough to really challenge them with a deadlift unless you're doing extremely high volume reps and sets. So I don't look to the kettlebell deadlift as a strength training tool per se in most situations. However, it is an exercise that I'm going to lean on to build the motor patterns and build the capability to move up into more challenging exercises where the lighter kettlebell would be appropriate, like the swing, clean, and snatch. With that said, if I want to turn a kettlebell deadlift into more of a strength training exercise, I can do it in a number of ways. And one of the best ways to do that, of course, would be to be unilateral as opposed to bilateral. So instead of a typical deadlift here, well, I can come onto one leg, and I can do this in a number of ways because now balance becomes an issue. So if you want to really be able to focus on the muscles and not on balance, the way that you would do that is you'd step next to the kettlebell, just like you were in the dead position, but you're going to kick 1 foot back and you're going to come onto the balls of your toes with those toes extended, okay? Now the proximity with this back foot is kind of important. You don't want it so far back that you're actually putting any weight on it. You want all of your weight on the front leg, and this is only here to aid in balance. Now it's extremely important that we maintain that really good posture. Now if you look at my position here, I'm in a deadlift, so if I just bring that leg out front, nothing changes. The only thing that changes is where my hip and where that leg is positioned. Otherwise, this is the same. So I'm going to come from here, and I'm going to take as much weight off of that back leg as possible. And you see how I kind of adjusted my stance? I was spread out. And I'm keeping my weight over my front leg and just using that back leg for balance. It's a great way to get the unilateral benefit without having to divert all of your nervous system, all of its attention to keeping you upright and preventing you from falling over. You can also do this, slightly different variation, is just simply to take your back foot and put it on the wall behind you. Very similar. If you have a wall available, you might like this variation more. I feel like here you're less likely to try to use the back leg, of course, to do any of the lift, but it's also not quite as stable. Then we can progress it 1 level further, and same position. And there's, by the way, you can position the kettlebell for, actually, let me do that. I'll just show you a different position. Either one works for all of these lifts. Now I'm going to the outside, and I'm going to be switching arms. And now this progression is just the one-legged deadlift with no assistance at all. Now this is fine if you have good balance, or if you're really into training your balance and so you're wanting that challenge. But if you're falling all over the place and it's not working for you, then step back to one of the more stable variations, because this is harder than it looks. Either way, there's something I want you guys to remember about the unilateral one-legged deadlift is that you could get 10 reps left and 10 reps right, and your legs are going to be fine because they did 10 reps. But your back that was holding that extension, that was doing that for 20 reps. And so when you're putting your acute variables together of reps and sets and everything for one-legged deadlifts, keep in mind that there's a lot of strength endurance required for 20 reps of a deadlift when it comes to the extensor chain. Okay, so if you get done with a set and you notice when you're done with both legs that your back and the extensors in your back are more pumped and sore than the legs, well, that's not unusual, and to a certain degree that's not a problem, right? Those are very important muscles to strengthen. I just want to keep in mind that 10 reps left and 10 reps right, that's 20 reps on those muscles. When you program it, that's important. There are some variations of the deadlift. Try to keep these videos as short as possible while still giving you a lot of good information and things to utilize and broader way of looking at things. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.